right. Welcome, everyone. We're going to give it just a minute to let everybody get in, and then we're going to dive in and get started. While you are logging in, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself and your organization in the chat along with your land acknowledgement. It's great to be able to see who all is here. So I'm going to give it just a second, and then I'll give you the rest of the housekeeping rules. Where are we doing? All right. Oh. Okay. Hi, I'm Terry Ball from Californians for the Arts, and I'm here to help lead you through the adventure that is the California Venues Grant. A couple of housekeeping things. Let me tell you first off that I'm working off 2 different computers today. I have a large screen in front of me and my computer to the side. So if I seem to be talking to the opposite of not looking at you, I apologize. I'm just working with some multiple technologies here today. As I said, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself and your affiliation in the chat. Any questions that you have today, please put those in the Q&A. So identification is in the chat, and we'll put links and things into the chat. But if you can put your questions into the Q&A, that helps us keep organized. There's a lot of information to cover. As questions come into the Q&A during the presentation, Patrice from Lindustry will work on answering some of those. And the goal is that at the end of the presentation, we will go over all of the Q&A. We'll answer anything that hasn't been answered, but we'll try time-wise to hit all of them. At the end of the day, you will get, not at the end of the day, following the webinar, you will get a link to a recording of the webinar, a copy of the slide deck, and also a printout of the Q&A with all of the questions and answers. So don't think you have to record everything to memory or write down every word as we're going through today. I will say there is a great deal of information, and I am not going to cover every word that is in the slideshow. I want to hit the highlights and leave time for your questions at the end. Please don't think that that means you shouldn't read every word in the guideline slide deck that you'll get access to. There are a lot of intricacies to this grant, and there's a tremendous amount of extremely useful information here in the slide deck. So make sure you avail yourself of all of that before you launch in. All right, so let's do some introductions. Eddie, you can go ahead to the next slide. I'm here representing Californians for the Arts and Californians Arts Advocates, who are 2 organizations that work in tandem here in the state. Californians for the Arts is the advocacy network, and Californians Arts Advocates is the lobbying voice in Sacramento for the arts and the creative economy in the state. So these are organizations that though they themselves are nonprofits, very much serve all of the arts and creative economies, both for-profit and nonprofit. They can only be here to do things like advocate for the creation of the California Venues Grant and other grants because of membership dollars. So you might consider checking both of these organizations out and thinking of joining them. They are out there fighting for you. Our partners in this venue grant are NEVA California and Cal Nonprofits. These are also wonderful advocacy groups here in the state serving our sector and our economy, and I encourage you to look into them and get to know them better. They also could use your support. Okay, a slight bit of housekeeping so we all understand the structure of these grants, because it can get a little complicated, all of the names on the scorecard. So the groups like Californians for the Arts and NEVA California advocate for the sector and convinced the state that our sector needed support coming out of COVID. And so the California Venues Grant was created, Venues Grant Program was created. The legislature writes a piece of legislation and it says we're going to create this program and we're going to put it under a state agency to run it. That state agency is Cal OSBA. Cal OSBA then hires an organization to actually administer the program. That's Lindustry. Lindustry then reaches out to partners like Californians for the Arts, NEVA California, and Cal Nonprofits to help both with communication and interaction with the field, and also to offer technical support. As we all know, the live performing arts industry is an animal unto its own. And so that we can help Lindustry and Cal OSBA understand the industry, and we can help you understand the intricacies of the grant. So we're here in the middle. We are not directly involved in the review of your grants. We do not have any say. We do not have direct access to your applications. We are here to help. We are here to interpret and help you understand. And we are here to facilitate communication between you and Lindustry as you go through this process. We've talked about most of all of this information. If you leave here with nothing else, leave here with my email address, grantsmanager@californiansforthearts.org. I also put it in the chat. We'll put it in other times, and it is obviously in these materials you will receive. If you have any questions, concerns, problems, just wonderful news that you'd like to report, I'm here to help you. So please make use of me. There is a phone number also. I will tell you that communicating with me via email is much quicker and much more efficient than a phone call. For one reason, I can answer emails at 2 o'clock in the morning, and most people don't like it if I return their phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning. I also can do emails while, having to sit in Zoom meetings and stuff. Tell no one. But if you can send me an email, the other advantage is you send me your details. I can research and get you a good answer and then send you back the details of what you need to do. And you have a record of it then, as opposed to having to write copious notes while we're talking on the phone. This does not mean if there's something that you'd really rather talk about as opposed to email, you can call me, just send me an email also. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, a couple of really important things to remember. If you applied in the Cal Venues program round 1, which was accepting applications at the end of 2021, and if you applied, whether your grant was funded, declined, or has not yet been resolved, you cannot apply during round 2. This is a continuation of the same grant program. It's just that there were some issues in the legislation the first time that had to be cleaned up legislatively, which is another good thing to keep in mind about this grant. As I mentioned, it was brought into being through legislation. What that means is, as opposed to a foundation or a city government coming up with a program and writing guidelines that maybe as they're going through, they discover there's a problem with it, they can just fix. This grant is very strictly prescribed by the legislation, and Cal OSBA and Lindustry have very little leeway in how they can interpret it. They have to go with the eligibility requirements that are in the law and the ways that the law dictates they can verify those. So keep that in mind. It's not that anyone's trying to be mean to you. It's just that then in this particular evaluation process, no one has the ability to think outside the box, color outside the lines. We have to go strictly by the guidelines and information that is included in the law. So even if you just started an application in round one and didn't ever submit and finish it, if it was started in the system, do not apply again. You can contact us. We can help you get in and submit that original grant, but don't start another one. Everyone can only receive one grant. And one of the ways to keep that straight is if we don't have multiple applications in for the same people. The system, if your EIN number or your social security number is entered more than once, the system's going to kick you out, and it's actually going to make the process a lot harder and not easier. The application portal is currently open and it will close on January 31st. I don't know the actual close time, if that's 5 o'clock or midnight. Patrice, maybe you know, just dawned on me. I know that it closes on the 31st. I don't know what time of day. These grants are not reviewed in a first come, first served basis. They are reviewed and prioritized based on the percentage of loss. And we'll talk about that loss in a minute. So do not rush to get your application in on day one, which obviously that was a month ago. And also understand that because of the prioritization, though there is a preliminary automatic review that goes in, oh, thank you. So the exact close time on the 31st has not been determined. I would assume for your own protection that it may not be later than 5 o'clock. And don't wait till 4:30 to begin. And we will, once we have a definite answer on that, we'll put that up on our website and socialize it out to everyone. But understand also, when you submit your application, you're going to get an automatic response, but that is just the preliminary. The fact that you get an email afterwards that says, okay, your grant's been accepted, that only means it's gone through the preliminary. You know, this is kind of the equivalent of in your math test, you spelled your name right on the paper and got that turned in. That does not indicate that you are getting a grant. But the actual review of these grants won't begin until February, after the application closes. These grants are each individually reviewed, so understand this is not going to be a speedy process. Don't be budgeting for receiving your grant, in February. This is going to take a little bit of time to go through. And obviously, until your grant is reviewed, you aren't certain whether you'll be getting a grant. All right. So we're going to take our time before we apply, and we're going to be patient once we've applied. Next. All right. The California Venues Grant Program will support eligible independent live event venues that were affected by COVID-19 in order to support their continued operation. Understand that you can be either an eligible venue and you operate and run the venue that has eligible live events that happen there, or you can be someone who manages, produces, promotes, we'll go over the full list, live events, that you're the live event producer that happens in an eligible venue. So there's two different eligibility criteria, but either one you can be your main thing, whether you're the venue, whether you're the event. The grant award is 20% of your gross earned revenue as reported on your 2019 tax return. So if you are on a fiscal year, it is not your 2019 calendar year gross earned revenue. It is the 2019 revenue, earned revenue that is reported on your 2019 tax returns. If you're on a fiscal year and you're not sure if that's the year that starts in 2018 and ends in 2019, or if it's the year that starts in 2019 and ends in 2020, what you want to do is talk to your tax preparer and say, which one is our organization's 2019 tax return? That's very critical, because that is where the revenue where the grant award is based on, is that 2019. And I repeat this frequently because it's one of the very common questions. And I realize for you on a fiscal year, that means your tax forms and your income doesn't necessarily line up exactly the same as those who are on a calendar year in terms of the COVID impact. Unfortunately, this is one of those things where this is what's written in the legislation, therefore, this is what it is. You know, when we were kids, we all learned because mom said so. Well, in this program, we learned because the legislation said so. So it is, in fact, if you're on a fiscal year, this is the tax return that you reported. Now, the program prioritization that we talked about is not based on your tax returns. That is based on calendar year. For 2019, you're going to look at quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4, total gross earned revenue for that period, and compare that to the gross earned revenues calendar year of 2020, Q2, Q3, and Q4. And your loss, which both will determine where you are in the priority of the grants that have been received, but there's also an eligibility requirement tied to your percentage of loss. So very important, whether your fiscal year or calendar year, it's your tax form. Whether your fiscal year or calendar year, for this loss and for the quarterly reports you're going to provide, that is calendar year, so that we're comparing everybody on the same scale of the regular year of 2019 and the COVID impact of 2020. For that percentage of loss, you're going to have to show that you had at least a 30% loss in 2020 as compared to your earned revenue in 2019. Okay, I promise this gets a little easier and it's not complicated. There's just a lot of details, so don't be feeling overwhelmed. Okay, next. The application process. We've really kind of talked about this, but as I said, you can either be the venue or you can be the one that produces the events. And in either case, if you meet the eligibility requirements, you can be eligible. So let's go. Okay, so now we're talking about the eligible venue. In order to be an eligible venue, that means you have to have a defined performance and audience space. Your venue has to have sound mixing equipment, a public address system, and a lighting rig. And you have to engage at least one person doing at least 2 of these jobs. So you can have 6 people that do all 6 of these jobs, but at minimum, you have to have one person that does at least 2 of the things listed here. Now, this does not have to be a full-time person, and they can have other duties also, but you have to have at least one person that does at least 2 of these things. The next criteria for the venues is if it is one of the 3 highest revenue grossing entities, locations, or franchises associated with the applicant. An applicant can ultimately only receive one grant. If you happen to own several different entities, or you are a board member or a senior staff of a nonprofit, and you work at more than one entity, you can only receive one grant. And if you own multiple entities, the one grant has to be for one of your 3 highest grossing entities. Again, don't ask me why. That's because that's what's written in the legislation. And this is an interesting eligibility requirement, because for a venue owned or operated by a nonprofit entity that produces free events, the events have to be produced and managed primarily by paid employees, not by volunteers. The issue where this is a problem is when you get to the event side of this, you have to have a certain level of income. So there has to be income from some source. So if your events are free, then it gets complicated in how you can qualify from a funding standpoint. But we'll go over that next. Okay, next. So those are the things you have to be for the venue to be eligible. Now, to be an eligible live event, you have to be one of these structures of organization, sole proprietor, a C Corp, you have to be one of those. The big thing to notice here is that you basically have to file your own tax return. So if you are either a performance group or a venue that is housed within a university, a college, a government entity, and you don't file your own taxes, you're a performance group at UC Santa Barbara, but UC Santa Barbara files taxes and you're a line item within them. If that is the case, you will not be eligible for this grant. There's a great deal of things that are tied back to the tax return. And so you have to be an entity that files a tax return, files your own tax return. One of the second eligibility criteria is you have to have one of the NAICS or NTEE codes that are in this list, and it's a 2-page list. We'll show you it all. One of those has to be either the NAICS code has to be on your 2019 or 2020 tax return, or if you're a nonprofit, one of the NTEE codes has to be listed in GuideStar on your profile. There are some of the codes that you will see that start with only 4 digits. Like down here, 7111 performing arts companies. If there are only 4 digits, it means any NAICS code, which are 6-digit codes, that starts with 7111, regardless of what the 5th and 6th digit are, then you meet this eligibility criteria. There are some of the other codes, like the 512131. In that case, because it's not listed as 5121, you have to have exactly 512131 or 512132 on your tax form. It doesn't matter if the number that's on your tax form was an accounting mistake or somebody didn't really understand. This is one of those places where Lindustry cannot make that waiver. You have to have exactly one of these NAICS codes or NTEE codes. I will tell you, if there's anybody here from the motion picture or drive-in movies, this is one of the challenges with these NAICS codes. The 2 NAICS codes that are listed here, that are the 2 eligible codes, are not codes that the electronic IRS filing system will let you select. That system has a tendency to consolidate, and because you select it from a list in that system. And so the only thing that system has is 512100. Unfortunately, the fact that you can't actually select these with an electronic filing does not change the requirement. So if you have a code that is like that, if you don't have one of these codes and yet you think you should have had one of these codes, email me and I can help you with the process of the various steps that you can take to rectify that, to potentially rectify that. Okay, let's go on. This next page is going to give you the rest of the NAICS codes, and then you'll see the list of NTEE codes that are for the not-for-profits. Your NAICS code is going to be on your tax form, and it's going to be identified as business code. So many people have no idea what NAICS codes are, or that they'd ever dealt with them, particularly nonprofits, because though NAICS codes are required on most for-profit tax forms, they are not required on 990s. There's a place to fill them in, but it's not a requirement, which is why for nonprofits, there's the list of parallel NTE codes. Okay, next. So the eligibility, and this just talks about the NAICS code issues. So we've gone over that. Let's go ahead. These are the steps that you would have to take if there is an issue with your NAICS codes. These are potential steps and recommendations, not recommendations, information. So let's go on. All right. So eligibility here is kind of like a complicated multiple choice question, because you absolutely have to be those first two things. You have to be one of those organizational types. You have to have one of those NAICS codes. And then for these three things, you have to meet one of this sets of bullet points. There are 7 bullet points on this page. You don't have to meet all 7 of them. You do have to meet one of the bulletin, the dark bulleted overall. So you have to be an eligible entity that meets both of the following criteria. So you have to be someone that meets both of those, or you can be the second group that meets both of the things under that, or you can be the third group that meets those 3 bullet points. In all 3 scenarios, your event has to take place in an eligible venue. Your performers have to be paid, and there has to be some sort of entrance fee, a ticket charge, a cover charge, but people have to pay to get into your event. The performers, every single performer on stage does not have to be paid, but there have to be paid performers in your events. And in one of the 2 criteria, instead of just here's a straight paycheck for the performers, there it does break it down that performers are paid an amount that is based on a percentage of sales, a guarantee in writing or standard contract, or another mutually beneficial formal agreement. Read the bits and pieces of these. Basically, the big difference between the 2 is in the first and the third, at least 70% of your earned revenue, is generated through cover charges or ticket sales, production fees or production reimbursements, or the sale of event beverages, food, or merchandise. What that means is, if you are a school and your primary business is as a conservatory, as a ballet studio, if your primary business is doing classes, but 2 or 3 times a year you have a culminating live performance for the students and or maybe some paid people involved, but 50% of your income comes from the classes and 50% of your income comes from the ticketed events. In that case, you would not be eligible, because at least 70% of the earned revenue has to come from the live events. Tuition, class admission does not count under that criteria. And that's true for the first one and the third one. The second one, the variation is there is not that 70% explicit requirement. This one alters, and instead you have to put your tickets on sale to the public at least 30 days before the date of the event. Then your performers still have to be paid, and you still have to meet that as a principal business activity, you organize, promote, and etc. So if you have a school and one time a year you do a performance, even if those tickets are available 30 days in advance, if really the school is your primary business and not the performances, you're probably still not going to meet this eligibility criteria. The final eligibility criteria here brings in sports. And so the difference for it is that you can't be a major league or professional sports team and fit that criteria. All right, next. Okay. Notwithstanding all of that, there are specific things that make you ineligible. So even if you meet everything in those 2 eligible criteria, but you are one of these things, then you're ineligible. There are several of these. Read through all of them because it covers a variety of things. The important ones I'll bring to your attention is you have to generate at least 75% of your gross earned revenue in California. So if you do 2 shows a year in California and 25 across the country, you're not generating 75% of your gross earned revenue in California. The other thing is, this is where they write in the 30% loss threshold. So it gets a little bit confusing because it's in the ineligible, but basically in Q2 through Q4 of 2020, compared to Q2 through Q4 of 2019, you have to demonstrate at least 30% loss in your gross earned revenue. And again, these are calendar years, regardless of if you file taxes on a fiscal year. For these calculations, you were talking about the calendar year of 2019 and the calendar year of 2020. Okay, let's move on. And this is more ineligible. Remembering again that if you own multiple entities, you can only receive a grant for one. Okay, next. Okay, there are specific things that these funds can be used on. There is not a specific time frame for when you have to use the funds, but this is a COVID relief grant, which means they are expenses that are tied back to the COVID pandemic. These can be expenses that you experienced in the past that your business is still trying to recover from. That is not a problem if these are COVID related and you're attributing to this grant. What you can't do is, if you've already gotten another grant where you report expenses to the state, or the SFOG grant on a federal level, if you have expenses that you have already attributed, reported to other COVID relief funding, you cannot double dip. No, it doesn't have to be only future expenses. It needs to be COVID related, which means if what you want to do is, repaint your full facility, if that's not a health or safety issue, that's probably not COVID related. If you're a producer, putting on a new show is probably not a COVID related expense. All right, let's go on. Okay, when you do this application, there are certain required documents you will upload as part of the application. I will warn you right now that sometimes you will upload those and it will say everything is fine. And then in the review process, you'll be asked for the same document again. Like all computer systems, this one has glitches sometimes too. So just keep these all together in your computer and an easy place to access them, because it is not at all unusual for you to get a message back that says, we need and it's something that you've already uploaded and it told you it was submitted, but they need it again. Roll with it. Don't sweat over it. Give it to them again. Okay, the application certification. This is a document that you can go to the program website. You're going to want to download this beforehand. You can sign it on the computer, or you can do a wet signature, and there are instructions involved here on how to do that. But you're going to read it all, and it's a whole bunch of things that you're going to say are true. As we have gone through with many of these programs, there's a whole lot of things that you have to say, we're not felons, and some of the various eligibility requirements are going to be asked in there. Don't just sign it, read it. And you can, as I say, do this beforehand, and then you upload it with the application. While we're talking about all these documents, keep in mind that human beings are going to read these at the other end, and that human being is going to be the one who is deciding whether you're eligible for this grant or not. It is in your best interest to make that person's life as easy as possible. When you create these PDFs, before you upload them, open them. Open them even also maybe on a different computer than yours, to make sure they actually work, to make sure they are clear and legible and easy to read. If you look at it and there's something that is strange, include a note. make a note with the PDF, and include that in the same PDF. Make life easy for the reviewers. So in addition to the application certification, and when you are downloading this, there is one for for-profits and one for nonprofits. So you're going to go to the website, you're going to go down to the bottom of the website after where it lists the additional documents and other information, and there's going to be one of the two that you can download. Your business financials. This is your tax returns. You want your complete, not a one cover summary sheet, your complete 2019 federal tax returns, 2019 California tax returns, and the same thing for 2020. Again, whether you're on a calendar year or a fiscal year, there is a tax return that is your 2019 tax return, and that's what you want to submit. Consult your tax professional to make sure you're putting in the correct one. You're going to need a government ID, driver's license or passport. This is for identification purposes. So you're going to make a scan of the front and the back. Make sure it's clear and legible. Interim financial statements. What this is those quarterly reports we talked about. And they want them kind of uniquely prepared. They want a profit and loss statement for Q2 of 2019 and a separate profit and loss statement for Q3 of 2019 and Q4 of 2019. And they want you to put the whole thing together in one PDF and then do the same thing for 2020. So ultimately what you have is 6 different P&L reports in 2 separate PDFs. They do not want they do not want a profit and loss report from Q2 through Q4. They want it broken down by the individual quarters. Again, if there's something weird about how your accounting staff processes your money, and you're afraid somebody's not going to be able to look at and see your gross revenue and your income from your shows, those kinds of things, put in a note and explain it. Then you need, one of the requirements for the grant is that you were in operation and filed with the state prior to June 1st of 2019. So one of these documents, articles of incorporation, certificate of organization, fictitious name registration, or a business license that can be on a local level, is what sole proprietors will often have as opposed to articles of incorporation. You don't have to have all of those. You do have to have at least one of them. If you don't have one of these and you don't have your copy or something, you can go to the California Secretary of State website. There are instructions inside. And they should have a PDF of your original filing document. While you're there, check and make sure you are in good standing with the California Secretary of State, because if you are not, Lindustry cannot complete and award the grant. So if you are, check that, look at it beforehand. For nonprofits, you want to do the same thing with the Registry for Charitable Trusts. If you are not current with one of those 2 things, the state cannot award you this grant. Nonprofits, you also need to provide your most recent IRS tax exempt letter. And they want you to go to the California state filing and get a copy of the report that says you're in good standing with the Secretary of State. There is a place that you will see in the application that asks for a board resolution. Everyone doesn't need to put in a board resolution. If you have one person that is the signer, and we're going to talk about this later, and for some reason you need to change that, that's the board resolution. When you're first applying, don't worry about the board resolution. There's just an upload place in case at some point you need to complete one. You don't have to do it for the initial application. Okay, next. Okay, we're going to go through several pages here that talk in detail about that application certification. So Eddie, let's just move through these because I'm not going to read them through you. It's going to take you step by step on how you prepare this. how you can do it in different ways. Now we're going to show you pictures of all of the various documents. Just in case you aren't sure, there's references here so you can see what they are. While we continue to move forward, one of the challenges with these grants is there is a place that comes together between, okay, stop here for 1 second, and I'm going to say this before I say what I was about to say. This page can be a little bit confusing because it says review your NAICS code and shows you a place to go look up NAICS codes. You don't want to be looking up and selecting your NAICS code and finding one that you think fits for you. What matters is what is the code on your 2019 and or 2020 taxes. You can't just pick a NAICS code that you think fits you. You have to enter into the application and use in the application process the NAICS code that is on your taxes. Okay, so moving on. All right, before we go into these tips and steps, there are going to be questions and portions of this process that are uncomfortable for you because it's personal information. The state, one of the issues with these grant programs, as we all know, is the point where the press comes out with a story about the people that have conned the state and gotten, 75 grants for fictitious businesses. It's a reality, and it is something that Lindustry and Cal OSBA are mandated to try to prevent. And that means they have to ask some intrusive questions and do some things that are uncomfortable. We all live our lives worrying about identity theft. And so we're very protective of our personal information. And this is one of those places in life where we have to find a place in the middle where both of us can coexist. The state has to ask these things because they have to do all of their due diligence to make sure you're not making up your company. And we all know how easy it is to create documents and things. So as you go through this process, just be aware they're not trying to scam you. They're not trying to make you uncomfortable. They're doing their due diligence. And the reason I bring this up here is because there is going to be as we're talking about these documents, it's going to be a place in this process where you give them a copy of your ID for the signer on the grant that has to be an officer of your organization that is listed on your statement of information. Whether you're a for-profit or a not-for-profit, you have a statement of information that lists who the officers or owner are. It does not have to be the owner. It does have to be an officer listed on the statement of information. So you're going to give, an officer is going to complete this grant. You're going to give an ID, and at one point in the grant, you're going to use your camera to show that the person sitting in front of the computer is the person on that ID. And that means when you're making those copies of the ID, you want them to be very clear and legible to make it easier for the computer to make the comparison. That also applies for all the rest of your documents. This note here tells you the ins and outs of what exactly to do. Read it, make their life easy. Next. One of the pages that we skipped over is don't use like info at emails. Use a real email. And if for whatever reason your email isn't info at, then use a different email. So, okay, let's go ahead and keep going. All right, so now we're going to talk about this persona process. And as I said, you're going to upload a picture of you, and then the camera, there's a number of steps, and it's going to have to recognize you. There are some tips in here about backgrounds and how to make it easier in terms of color and contrast. You can probably see the clocks and things in my background. When I first tried to do the persona process, the computer got confused and thought me and 9 friends were applying. So think about those issues, where your space is. Okay, now we're going to go through because there's information here to show you every step, so you will know what's coming. So let's keep going. Keep going. Sometimes this process will take a little bit of time. this is why don't wait to the very last minute to apply. The normal application should take you about 20 minutes. Persona and the banking portion can get a little glitchy, so leave yourself more time than that. Next are a whole bunch of tips on ways to prepare your computer to make it go through the system easier. Do them. There are step-by-step directions here. We're not going to go through them, but I very much encourage you to do them. Okay, next. They're going to tell you how to clear your cache and set incognito mode and turn off your pop-up blockers. Google Chrome seems to be the system that the application portal likes the best. All right, so now this is showing you a picture of the website where there's a lot more resources. Let's go to the next, it's going to show you now every single page of the application. We're not going to go through them, but it's going to show you so you know and can prepare yourself for the process. One important thing, even if you have applied to other Lindustry programs, if you applied to the California Relief Program, if you applied to the Cal Nonprofits Program, this is a unique, separate program. You cannot use your previous account. You can use the same email address, but you have to set up an account. Everybody has to start with the step of setting up the account. It's going to require an email and a cell phone. The email address and the cell phone, make sure they're accessible to you. Every time you try to access your portal throughout the process, not just the application, but the entire process, you have to put in your information. It's going to send you a text and you have to enter the text. So make sure the person who's going to be monitoring and overseeing the grant and that cell phone are connected. Okay, next. All right, now this is going to go through step by step. This first page is not about the organization, it's about the officer. So it's the officer's address, it's their social security number, etc. The system here for addresses uses a lookup database, so they're not false addresses. Every once in a while, it gets glitchy and it will not accept your address. If it does not accept your residential address, put in the business address and you can sort it out during the review. You have to enter an address. You cannot use a PO box, and you have to enter an address that the system ultimately will accept. You cannot move on to the next page until it accepts your address. Okay, so the first page is the owner/officer. Next. Now they're going to ask about the company. So in this case, it's the business address and all of that information. Some of these questions, as we go through, are demographic questions and not eligibility questions. Okay, so next. Okay, now some of these begin to be some of the demographic. The amount requested is, you're going to go back and you're going to check that 2019 gross earned revenue, and it's 20% of that or $250,000, whichever is less. You're going to enter those the gross earned revenue from 2019 that's going to match your tax return. Now, these next questions, will it create jobs? How many employees you had? These are demographic questions. Answer them to the best of your ability, how you define them within your organization. These will not affect your eligibility criteria. They're just here so that afterwards, the program can report back to the legislature on the impact of the monies. Okay, next. Again, 90% of this is just demographic. The NAICS code is not. That is an eligibility question. And in order to get past this step, you have to have one of the eligible NAICS codes. Everything else, answer it how you define it within your organization. Next. Now they're going to ask you a bunch of questions that are all tied back to those eligibility factors. Answer them honestly. and plainly and clearly. If some of these questions can sometimes get confusing and it can trigger an auto decline. If you submit your application and you think you're eligible, but you get automatically declined, then email me and we can contact Lindustry and see if we can sort out, if it was a confusion or if you legitimately are not eligible. Okay, next. The same thing. Keep moving through. We've covered all of these things. All right, now here it's going to show you the exact pages. This is where your persona comes in. Keep going. Remember, this is not like a staff development person or the finance director. This is an officer of your statement of information. The persona picture, the ID, and those officer questions, all someone off your statement of information. Next. Then we're going to have you upload documents. I think we skipped the bank somehow. Maybe these have gotten out of order. But, oh, plan. There we are. Okay. So the second intrusive concerning element of the application process is that you have to give them your banking information. They use a third-party company called Plaid. And what it does is they're going to ask for your banking institution and your sign-in information to your online banking account. This is used for two purposes. One is direct deposit is how they pay you at the end, but also this is another part of their fraud prevention. And so the third-party company will actually look into your account to make sure it is a legitimate account. If your bank is not part of Plaid, and some banks are not. I bank at Montecito Bank and Trust. It's a small community bank, and they are not in this system. If your bank cannot be found, if it searches or you try to connect and it won't connect, then there is a way to move past this. If you continuously search and it can't ever find you, then it should come up and ask you, do you want to do it another way? In that case, they will ask for your banking, your routing, and your account number, and you will upload 2 months, your two most recent bank statements. So I would suggest that you have a PDF prepared already of your 2 most recent bank statements in case you get hung up on Plaid. All of these steps, you cannot move to the next step until you complete them. Let's go, because I really want to get to questions. Now, this is where you upload the documents. They're going to tell you we need this, meeting the requirements they told you before for your preparation of your document. You're going to upload it. Okay, next. All right. You cannot go backwards in the application as you're filling it out. You can stop, log out, gather information again if you need, and then log back in, but you can't go backwards. But at the very end, once you filled everything out, you get to review the whole thing and you can make changes at that point. You will not get a printout of your application once you submit it. If you want to keep a record for yourself of the answers you provide, you need to take screenshots because you will not be able to access the whole application once it is submitted, and you will not get a printout. So now is the time when you get to this point to go back over everything, make sure you're good with your answers before you submit. Once you submit, you cannot access the application without Lindustry reopening it for you. And they will at some point probably ask you to, they'll reopen it and ask you to upload documents and that kind of thing. But don't submit and then think you can come back and add information. Okay, next. So, as I said, you'll get an email that says your application's been submitted, you're in queue for eligibility review. These things don't really mean anything yet. You may get a response that comes right back and says you're not eligible. In that case, you want to either contact the call center or email me. to find out, what was the eligibility factor, and is it really true, or did you just answer the question incorrectly because you were confused? Next. And this talks about the review process, which we've really talked about either. It's going to be a 2-stage. At any point, you can go back into the portal and it will say there what your status is. You will also get emails. The email account and the phone number that you provide in the contact information for the officer, you want to make sure that is an email and a cell phone that is actively monitored. If your officer is about to go off for a 6-month vacation where they're climbing in the Himalayas and will have no contact, you don't want to use them as the officer here, because not only does that email and cell phone have to be monitored, because that's how they'll communicate with you. And if they send you an email or send you a voicemail asking you to do something, they will try a couple of times. They will not try 50 times. If after 2 or 3 times, I think it's 5, they don't get a response, they will move on. And you will be in limbo and ultimately decline. So check your emails, check your voicemails. If you're a person that doesn't normally answer numbers that you don't recognize, now is not a bad time to answer them. The officer will have to have a phone conversation with Lindustry for a final identity check before this process is over. Okay, next. And these are just some general information. Read them. Let's go on. And this is my contact information and additional resources. The biggest thing I can say to you is don't get overwhelmed. Don't panic or freak out. Some of the language doesn't apply, exactly in a program that has both for-profits and not-for-profits. Don't get hung up by that little stuff. It seems intimidating. It's not once you get into the process. If you have trouble, even as you're going through, shoot us an email. Let's go down to the Q&A and see what we have going here. So I'm going to start first with the open ones, and then we'll go to the ones that have already been answered. We are a nonprofit community theater. We engage independent contractors for each of our performances to work as sound engineers. But does this meet the eligibility requirement? Yes. For this purposes, they do not have to be employees. As long as you pay them, as long as you have someone in you shall be fine. I will tell you in terms of AB5, you might want to look into that independent contractor part. That's another webinar. Will a recording of this webinar be available? Yes, it will be posted onto the California for the Arts website, where there's all kinds of resources. The slide deck will be there. A transcript of this Q&A will be there. So if you have to jump off right now, I know we're very close to time. And also the previous recorded webinars are there. You'll also get an email, follow-up email, giving you the link and letting you know it's all there. Also on the site, it says lesser of, yes, it is a maximum of, in terms of that question. If 20% of your 2019 gross earned revenue is more than 250,000, you only get for 250,000. The other thing is, if you received a California relief grant, this was the very first relief grant programs that went on for a long time. They started at the beginning of 2011. 2011, no, they didn't. They started at the beginning of 2021. It was lump sum grants. If you received one of those grants, that amount will be deducted from your award amount. So if your award was going to be $250,000 and you got a $25,000 California relief grant, your grant amount will now be $225,000. Okay, our venue is 50 seats, and we have a specially designed room made by a renowned composer for acoustic music. We do have lighting, and on occasion we use a PA system, but we try to avoid that as much as possible because we have a beautiful sounding room. You have to have a PA system. It does not necessarily have to be used on every single show, but you have to have one. You also have to have a sound mixing board. Okay. Now let's scroll down. There is no, the funding timeline, if you are selected, it usually takes anywhere from 7 to 10 business days once you're awarded and you've signed your funding, your grant agreement at the end, then it can take anywhere from 5 days to 2 weeks for the money to be transferred. Another thing to note is when you sign that grant agreement, you'll get a DocuSign and your signer will sign it. But unlike many DocuSigns, they do not automatically send you a copy of the grant agreement afterwards. You're supposed to evidently be able to download your grant agreement from the portal. I've never really known anybody that has been able to do that, but I'm sure there are lots of people that do, and I just don't hear from them. But if you need or want, and I know especially for nonprofits, you need a copy of your grant agreement for audits and stuff, you need to contact either the call center or myself after you've signed it and ask for a copy. They don't send one out. There is no specific timeline, however, for spending the money. How long after submission before we know we are selected? There's absolutely no way to know, Robina. It all depends on how the review process goes. I would assume, depending upon how many applications get submitted, it could be 2 or 3 months. Because again, they're going to start with the organizations that have the greatest percentage of loss and move through it. So expect it's not, like I say, nobody's going to hear anything probably until the end of February in terms of, having a completely completed grant. A clarification on the NAICS. We are listed as 11,300, which is not listed. No, it is if 11,300, I do not believe there are no eligible codes that begin with 113. Correction, our code now, see 711,300. Now the answer is turned to yes. Because 7113 is listed in the list of eligible codes. That means any 6-digit code that starts with 7113 is eligible. Alvin, you stated that if our application was rejected, that we cannot apply. However, our application was rejected because I didn't say you couldn't be reconsidered. Yes, you are correct that if your application was rejected in round 1, you cannot reapply. If conditions have changed since round 1, you can request a reconsideration because this really is just one big grant. It's just that halfway through, they changed some of the eligibility requirements. What was supposed to happen was all of the grants were supposed to have been re-reviewed. And if you are eligible now because of one of the changed codes, then you should have been contacted. But as with any large system, things don't go exactly. So if you were rejected in the first round and you think you are eligible now, or if your grant application, as far as you know, just never was resolved, contact me. We can put in a request for reconsideration and explain, your NAICS code is now on the acceptable list or whatever else has changed. There are a lot of people that applied the first round and weren't eligible because of the percentage of loss, which is now very different. So don't apply again. Don't start a new application. Send me an email and we can request that your grant be looked at again. Is this grant based on qualifying and lottery selection? If you qualify and everything matches, grant is guaranteed. The way this grant is, you get reviewed. If you meet all the eligibility requirement, and we are at a point in the process when there are still funds, then you will be granted and awarded. If you meet all the eligibility requirements, including things like being in good standing with the state, and that you don't meet any of the things that make you ineligible. There is no lottery involved. They will take all the grant applications once the application portal closes and put them in order based on loss. They'll begin at the end and they'll move through the system. Okay, the acting company started an application in 2021, round one, but did not submit the application because of eligibility. If you started an application in 2021, even if you didn't submit it, don't start a new application. If you can't get into your portal, contact me and we'll get Lindustry to reopen the portal so that you can complete that application. Don't start a new one. As I said before, if you end up twice in the system is going to reject you and the process is going to be more complicated. 7113 is not 7113. I don't know if there's some problem and it's not in the slideshow, but that is one of the eligible codes. So if there is, I will check afterwards and see if we have some sort of typo in the slideshow. But 7113 is definitely one of the eligible codes. I want to make sure I understood the eligibility regarding paid performers. Most of our performers are volunteers. We do pay musical directors, accompanists, and professional actors. Yes. If you have some professional actors and musicians, et cetera, that you pay, then on that factor, you would be eligible. I don't want to say, yes, absolutely, you'll be eligible because I don't know the rest of your factors. But you do not have to pay everyone on stage. You just have to pay some of the people on stage. Okay. I think, unless there are any other new ones over here, we've done it. And we're only 7 minutes over. Thank you for those of you who are still here. I don't think we've skipped over any of my usual pearls of wisdom. Like I say, if you prepare your documents beforehand and go through the application all the way beforehand, so you have all the information collected and you aren't trying to go back and forth, you should be able to complete this process in less than 30 minutes. 40 if Persona doesn't like your face or your bank doesn't want to behave. It is not a complicated process. If you went through the SVOG process, it is actually much easier than that in terms of the number of documents uploaded. Do understand that, like with any other system, computers have glitches. So be patient, do the computer tech things that it suggests beforehand, and you should be fine. If you have problems during the application, you can call the call center during sort of Monday through Friday, 7 to 7. You can send me an email, and we can give you some tips, perhaps, that others have encountered similar problems. As you go through the process, not just here to help before you apply, we're also here throughout. One thing that I like to say is the people at Lindustry are all great, and they all want to help as many legitimate people as possible get these funds. In every organization, communication has to filter down. And there are several grant programs that Lindustry is operating. And so the call center has a lot of different details. As you saw, there's lots of fine points in some of these eligibility factors. As prepared as everyone would like every single one of the call center people to be, the reality is sometimes people are going to get confused. If you call the call center and you get information that doesn't make sense to you, that confuses you, don't just give up. Ask again. You can call the call center again, see if you get a different operator. You can shoot me an email. If you get something really strange that you're told that doesn't seem right, it's great to let me know, because then I can let Lindustry know. and they can address it, and it will keep other people from having the same issue. So if you are having issues, please let me know, not only because I can help you, but because that also helps us help the whole system. There's something else that just flitted across my brain. But I don't remember what it is. All right, so if nobody has any other questions, I will hang here for a minute in case you do, but thank you for coming. Do your preparation, and then all should go well. Thanks, good luck, and I look forward to hearing lots of fabulous success stories as you move through the process. Thank you.